Do I like? I like open fires, moonlit nights, chatty letters, rainy days. I like daydreaming. I love this colorful little island of ruby, emerald, and sapphire. Yet often my dark moods come. I'm possessed body and soul by this depression. They say women shouldn't write. Some days I almost give up. But I cannot contain my imagination. I made Anne real. I gave her my love of nature, my love of books, and my childhood dreams. My greatest happiness would be to climb the alpine path and write upon it a woman's humble name.
Lucy Maud Montgomery battled depression, rejection, and sexism to become known around the world for Anne of Green Gables and 19 other novels.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Hello, I'm Carl Wells. This is Point to Point. My guest today is Telegram columnist Bob Wakeham. Bob has been a journalist in Newfoundland and Labrador for over 40 years. Many of those years spent with the CBC in television and radio. He's won multiple journalism awards over his career. This is our second part of our program with Bob Wakeham, and it's a delight to have you here again.
Well,
Bob.
thanks, Carl. You're flattering me by having me on for another half hour.
I want to go back. We dealt with a portion of your journalism career on the last program, but I want to take you way back to when you were about 12 years old. You grew up in Gander. Your dad worked at the airport. He worked for an airline.
He worked for Trans World Airlines.
Right.
And, you know, we left. My family left because Dad got transferred to the United States. And it was a seminal moment in my life, obviously, and a pivotal moment in my life, and not a very pleasant moment in my life. Because, Carl, I was a typical 12-year-old Newfoundland kid, but it was an idyllic setting to grow up in Gander. You know, I'm sure that there were young fellas and girls as happy as I was, but no one could have been happier. And we only got television the last year that I lived there, so we weren't influenced too much by the outside world. And all we did was, we were outside all the time, playing sports and kick the can and spotlight, and I was just a happy little kid. And all of a sudden, I was on an airplane on the tarmac in Gander, moving to the United States, having never been west of Grand Falls in my life, just Gander and Grand Falls. Grand Falls, where my mother was from. We'd go out and visit her relatives there all the time. And all of a sudden, I was on this airplane, and I know 12 years old sounds very, very young, but I guarantee you, I was old enough and to know that something very different was happening. My life was taking a big turn, and I also knew I didn't think that it was for the better. And I remember, you know, sitting on the airplane. I even remember where I was sitting in the aisle seat. Two of my sisters were sitting next to me, and Dad was on the seat across the aisle. And I started to kind of quietly cry. And there was this flight attendant who came down and he said, "What's the matter, young fella? Are you afraid of flying? Is that why you're crying?" And Dad said to me, "Are you afraid of flying? You're not afraid of flying, are you, Bob? Why are you crying?" And I said, and I was reminded of this from many times afterwards by Dad, and all I could blurt out was, "I don't want to leave Newfoundland." And then, of course, I started really crying. And then my sister started bawling, and everybody else started bawling. Poor Mom and Dad, there were five youngsters. It was a pretty traumatic thing that they were doing as well, leaving Newfoundland, and they had five youngsters crying. But I just knew that my life was changing, and I didn't want to leave this place. And I think even then I knew I would come back, Carl, you know. You know, and even my first day in school in Virginia, I went from, you know, Gander to Falls Church, Virginia. And I'm in this school, and it was in the fall of the year, and I'm looking around, and I was really shy, your classic introverted noof. And I'm looking around, and all these big, tall Americans, and they're all looking at me, you know, say, who's the new kid in the back? And I'm mortified. Anyway, this nun was there, and she said, she introduced me, which I thought, I was mortified altogether. Then she said, and she had this Virginian drawl. She said, boys and girls, we got a new student here today, Robert Wakeham. Come on up here now, Robert. And I thought to myself, come up? Geez, we never stood in front of the class in Gander. We never spoke to what we were spoken to. Next thing you know, I found myself in front of the class, and she said, now, Mr. Wakeham, tell us a little bit about yourself. So I had my head down, you know, and I said, well, I'm from Gander, Newfoundland, you know, and we just moved here. And she said, Mr. Wakeham, I don't know whether it's because you got your head down or whether it's because of that Irish brogue, but we can't understand a word you're saying. She said, where did you get that Irish brogue? And I said, that's the way we talk, sister. That's the way we talk. Anyway, this nun finally realized I was dying 1,000 deaths and told me to go back to my seat. So if I was apprehensive on that airplane, after that first day, I used to tell Dad years later, Dad, I said, at that moment I hated you. Now, myself and my father ended up, we had a grand relationship all of our lives, but at that moment I wasn't too fond of him for having dragged me out of Newfoundland and plunked me down in this culture that I knew nothing about.
You lived in a couple of different towns in the States, right?
Well, we did a couple of different. Yeah, we lived in New York. And, you know, I should say that it wasn't all, you know, dreary and sadness. I mean, it was pretty exciting to be living just outside of Washington D.C. And then we moved to New York, and we lived across the river from New York. So here was I, a little kid from Gander, who had been, you know, I used to go down to Gander Gardens and see Angie Carroll and people like that play hockey, and John Murphy, and all of a sudden here I was watching Rod Gilbert play hockey and Bernie Geoffrion, you know. So that was neat, you know. That was really,
heady stuff.
That was heady stuff. And then I eventually went to school in North Dakota and graduated from the University of North Dakota with a degree in journalism, and then came back to Newfoundland. And I knew I was always going to come back to Newfoundland. And Mom and Dad had sent me back here, or at least had. You know, I would beg them to send me back to Newfoundland, and they would always comply. So that kept alive not just my fondness for Newfoundland, but a fondness that turned into a passionate love affair with Newfoundland. And I knew once I got out of school, I would be back here, and I was.
And why journalism?
Well, I could really BS you, Carl, and say that it was because of some sort of, you know, urge to improve society and to pursue the truth, but it was something much more mundane. I was always a big sports fan, still am, and I knew I wasn't going to be a professional athlete, but I thought maybe journalism would be a way to stay active in the sports world as an observer and to write about it. And my teachers over the years had said told me I had a knack for writing, so that's what I did. I became a journalist because I wanted to observe sports, and in fact, when I applied for a job at the Telegram, in 1972, I asked the managing editor, Bob Ennis, he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to be a sports reporter. And he said, there's no opening in sports. How would you like to cover news for a while? And I said, I said, I'd rather do sports. And he said, well, I'll tell you what, if there's an opening in sports over the next little while, we'll put you in there. And of course, as I say, I
don't remember you ever doing sports.
No, and I never did. That was it. It was it. I fell in love with covering news, and I never looked back.
Wow. Bob, when we last spoke on the part one of the show, we had taken you through your career, but then your career suddenly ended, and it was because of a very serious diagnosis.
Yeah, it was, as with most people who receive a diagnosis of cancer, as I did, it was a shock to the system, a shock to me, a shock to my wife Heather, a shock to my family. And it was a life-altering experience, Carl, obviously, and all cancer stories, I suppose, have their certain amount of uniqueness. Not suppose, I know they have their certain amount of uniqueness, and mine did as well. And I try to capsulize this if I could, you know, if I can. You know, I had cancer of the colon, and there was an emergency operation, and it metastasized into my liver. And then I was operated on the second time to take the cancer out of my liver. And then I started getting chemotherapy, and it was pretty rough chemotherapy because they thought that it had spread even beyond the liver. And then I got a CAT scan in the middle of my chemotherapy, a routine CAT scan, and one day myself and Heather were sitting here, and the oncologist came in and said, we have some bad news. The cancer has spread to your lungs, and it's also back in your liver. And I said, well, what does that mean? And he said, well, you know, it's level 4. It's incurable. And I said, so I'm terminal. And he said, yes, you're terminal. Your care from now on will be defined as palliative. And, you know, I just, you could have knocked me over with a feather, I guess. You know?
I can't imagine what was going on in your mind.
I can't. I can remember, you know, being in the room, and I can remember Heather crying, and I was sort of like almost as if I was doing a documentary, Carl. And this person, I was observing this person, Bob Wakeham, who was getting this news. It was sort of almost an out of body experience. And I said, well, you know, he said, we're going to put you on some really a tougher regimen of chemo to see if we can get some extra time for you. And I said, well, how long will I undergo chemotherapy? And he said, forever. And as soon as he said forever, I knew then exactly what it was all about. And he said, we'll put you in, we're going to set up a meeting now with the palliative care people and the pain management people. And we just left knowing that I was going to undergo chemo and that I was going to die within a matter of months. So for the next 3 or 4 months, Heather and I basically had to survive with the knowledge, having been told that I only had months to live. And what happened, there was a bit of a serendipity, as they say. Heather was talking to this Dr. Tava, who had operated on my liver. And she said to him, he said to her, how's Bob doing? She said, well, not very well, Bob's dying. And he just didn't believe it. He said, I'm going to take a look at the CAT scan. Anyway, he phoned me one night at home. He said, this is Dr. Tava. Bob, he said, I don't believe that there is cancer in your liver. I said, I believe that that's scar tissue. So anyway, again, to make a long story, perhaps even longer, the oncologists and the radiologists all got together, and they gave me a subsequent MRI and came back and said, it's not in your lungs, but we're 100% convinced it's in your liver. You are terminal. So this was, you know, again, over a period of 4 or 5 months.
They came back and said it wasn't in your lungs.
Wasn't in the lungs, but it definitely returned to the liver. So nothing had changed.
So had it been in your lungs at all? Or?
No, it hadn't been in my lungs at all.
Okay.
And Dr. Tava still did not believe that it was in the liver. So I was sitting across from him, like I am with you, and I said, what would you do if you were me, Dr. Tava? And he said, well, Bob, I hate to suggest this, but I would have more surgery, and that would be your 3rd surgery in 6 or 7 months. But I said, well, if that's what you would do, let's do it. So he opened me up in May of 2004 and found nothing. There was absolutely nothing. There was no cancer in the liver, the lungs, nowhere. They even did an ultrasound when they had opened me up and found cancer in no part of my body. So the CAT scan was wrong, and there was a misdiagnosis. And I'm not bitter about that, you know, Carl, to tell the truth. I was just so delighted, as was Heather and my mother and father and everybody who were fond of me or loved me were delighted. And everything stopped. The chemo stopped, and that was 15 years ago. So to say the least, the diagnosis was wrong. But for 4 or 5 months, I always thought, you know, that when I think back now, that if anyone ever told me I was dying, I would just curl up in the fetus position on the couch and cry, you know, or maybe go back on the booze or something, you know. But I didn't do any of that. I continued to push, and, you know, myself and Heather continued to go to movies and swim in our pool, or I continued to try to go hunting with my buddies, you know, even though it was tough, you know, because I was getting all this chemo. But you know, I just put one foot ahead of the other. I just kept moving and moving, and I survived, you know. So, but after that, Carl, I went back to the CBC about 2 years after I've been diagnosed, and I walked in, and everybody came up, probably you too, and were giving me hugs and welcome back, Bob. But I knew at that moment that whatever passion I had for journalism hadn't gone away, but I said, I think my life has changed, and I'm going to retire. And over the next few months, I just proceeded to do exactly that and got a nice offer from the CBC, and then called it quits.
That's how it affected you. It just, it was this life-changing
It was.
moment.
I just felt like I couldn't. And I thought to myself, there was still a chance, a really good chance, that the cancer would come back legitimately, and
Well,
honestly
yes,
into my
because,
liver.
because anytime you hear the word metastasis,
Yeah.
that's pretty scary.
Yes, and I had a 1 in 4 chance at that point, even after they realized that they had misdiagnosed me in terms of being terminal. There was still only I had a 1 in 4 chance of the cancer not coming back into my liver. So I said to myself, well, if I'm going to die, I don't want to die behind the desk at the CBC. I just soon die trouting, or at a movie theater, or with Heather and home watching Jeopardy.
Speaking of Heather, your wife, you in the book, For the Moment, your autobiography, you wrote very tenderly and lovingly about Heather and what she meant to you and how she really is responsible for getting you through that really, really dark period. Can you
Well, she was. I don't know if I can
about-
talk about it without getting emotional, Carl, but yeah, I mean, and again, like other people have gone through cancer, I'm sure they would say that having a loving partner is a real key to survival. And in my case, Heather was my guardian angel, and she pushed me got me up to get out and walk when I did want to get out and walk, and made me take all kinds of contraptions that she had put together, all kinds of liquid stuff that supposedly was going to help me, and maybe it did, maybe it didn't, but the fact is, psychologically it helped me. She was just always there. I'll tell you a little anecdote that sort of personifies what Heather did for me. My first time in hospital, it was an emergency surgery, and a couple of days later, I was lying in bed, and I had tubes everywhere, in every orifice of my body, and was feeling really miserable and was frightened to death. And I was lying back in bed, and there was an IV, and the IV sort of makes it almost has a rhythm to it, and it was a disgusting rhythm to me at the time, and it almost sounded a little bit like a snare drum. And I used to play the drums in a half-Irish band in North Dakota, a country and western group. We were really awful. But anyway, so I knew what a snare drum, I knew about a beat, and I heard this beat, 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 and I wanted to pick up the IV pole and throw it against the wall, And all of a sudden, I started to hear something else that seemed to be compromising this beat that I didn't want to hear. And I looked up, and here was Heather, and Heather was sitting in a plastic chair against the wall, and she was knitting. As it turns out, it was a vest for me. And so the sound I was hearing was just the knitting needles, So I looked at her, and I didn't tell her I was awake, and like I said, I had a tube down my nose. I couldn't speak anyway. But I just looked at her and looked at the knitting and looked up at her face, and I thought to myself, and her face looked tired, but I thought of her then, she was taking care of me, she was protecting me. And I think I drifted out to sleep that night for the first time, and maybe the only time, feeling almost peaceful, Heather was in the room, Heather was taking care of me, I was protected. This big, old, burly, hairy-arsed guy, and I was frightened to death, but Heather was there. She was protecting me, So I'll never forget that, to tell the truth.
And great relief all around.
Yeah.
Your parents who came home,
Yeah,
they
and
were in the States.
my parents were, I was, in my early 50s, 53. But as far as Mom and Dad were concerned, I was still that 12-year-old kid,
Sure.
I was just a little kid,
Yeah.
and they were frightened to death. And so,
Yeah.
it was relief all the way around.
Yeah.
Carl, I wouldn't wish what we went through on my worst enemy, but anyway, I got through it, and then I retired. And in some ways, obviously I didn't want to retire, but I'm glad that it was my mid-50s, and I have had more time to pursue my avocations like movies and books and fishing and
eventually
hunting.
Eventually you did pick up your pen again.
I did indeed.
Because you've had, how long have you had the column in the Telegram?
About 10 years now.
Yeah.
And that's been that was something new for me, and it didn't just come easily. I worked at it. I was told I had a bit of a gift for writing, but the idea of just once a week sitting down and writing these opinion pieces, it just took some getting used to, and like I said, I worked hard at it. I had done commentary for CBC Radio, and back in the day, in the mid-'80s, I was doing an analytical piece for the CBC Radio on the House of Assembly. But the column was straight up and straight up opinion, and this is what Bob Wakeham thinks. And But I've gotten used to the writing process. It's a different kind of writing process, and now I really enjoy it, to tell the truth.
How do you prepare for a column? I imagine you must have to watch all the newscasts on television and listen to as much current affairs on radio as you possibly can, because it's a political column. Right?
Yeah, mostly political, although I've written about everything from cancer to my to my career.
Yeah, recently you wrote about being a kid in the States.
Exactly,
and little girl that you had.
Yes, my mom and dad, foster baby.
Family,
yes, yeah. But I don't pay an inordinate amount of attention to, I sit down and watch Here and Now, and God, my Here and Now friends are going to kill me, but I watch it for 5 or 10 minutes, and that's about it, just to get a grasp of what's maybe is going on in the province. But once I get an idea, Carl, that's the main thing, and then my process is just almost stream of consciousness. Then I put everything down. I don't know how you wrote your column for the Telegram, but mine was just almost gibberish. Whatever I was going, put it down, type it out, and then refine it 2, 3, 4 times, and go back and look for the nice turn of phrase, and try at times to be half-assed funny, and I sort of have. I've been told anyway that I have an irreverent personality, so that comes. I like to let that come through too,
Yeah. For me, it was. I thought I didn't work that way. For me, I had a lot of papers around, notes.
Whatever works, as they say, Carl, because yours obviously worked as well. So
I work kind of visually, so I like to have things in front of me so that I can refer to them. But I wanted to talk to you about journalism, because we're in a stage right now where a lot of newspapers are closing, radio and television newsrooms are having their budgets slashed. People are getting their news from social media or some other online source. It doesn't seem to me, despite all of the outlets that we have, it seems to me that things aren't as good as they used to be.
Well, I don't know if they're certainly different from what they used to be, Carl. There's no doubt about that, and with the new technology, and I don't know how to text, or I don't know anything about blogs, and I'm really old-fashioned that way, and I don't know how to text, but I know that the journalists today, there's a real immediacy there. The minute that something happens, they have to file to a website, or they're on the radio talking about what just happened. In my day, you got, for instance, at the Telegram, you probably had all day to write your story that was going to appear in the paper the next day. When we were at Here and Now, someone would have a 2-minute item that they had all day to prepare. So you could give it a lot of depth. And I think that that's what's missing. We used to call it long-form journalism as well, mini docs and long documentaries. But I just think that journalists just don't have the time to put into the time really that is required to give journalism some depth. It's just the nature of the beast. It's not because they're not as talented as we were. I think it's just the technology has almost taken over journalism, and to the detriment of consumers of news and current affairs, in my opinion. But I'm an old fart,
Yeah, but there's a lot of stuff out there that's just not. Well, it's fake news.
Yeah, fake news. Yeah. Well, and then everybody can become a journalist these days with social media, and they don't. Most of them, if not all of them, don't have really the kind of training that we had. I know that sounds kind of, a bit show-offy, but we were trained, and you go through a process of becoming a better journalist. But nowadays, people are just throwing stuff out there. And oftentimes are breaking all the rules of even the most basic journalistic tenets.
Yeah. Do you have any broadcast or any journalistic heroes?
Well, John Furlong, my late friend, was a hero. Maybe because we had so much in common, and John made no bones about the fact that, he was an alcoholic like I was an alcoholic. He was a frustrated Catholic, like I was a frustrated Catholic. We had seen, we worked together a long time. We never had one foul word between us, not one disagreement. So John was a bit of a hero, but, Ray, I absolutely adored Ray Guy, and we became really good friends over the years. And I just think Ray was the best writer, the best satirist, the best anything in Newfoundland. We could speak another half hour, as I know you could, about the talent that was Ray Guy. So, you know, people like John Furlong and Ray Guy, Bill Kelly, my old friend at Land and Sea, you know.
For a period of time, I think you taught a journalism course at MUN, did you not?
I did, yeah, for a few semesters. I taught a course in documentary making, which was a real treat, to tell the truth, to sit down and talk to a dozen or so fledgling journalists or documentary makers, and I enjoyed it thoroughly. And the only reason I got out of it, to tell the truth, it just didn't pay well enough, Carl. I mean, I put what I put into it, you know, I put my heart and soul into it, and it was taking up invaluable time that could have been better spent in a boat or at a movie theater, or with a gun in the woods with my dog. So I said, unless you can pay me more money, I'm out of here. So I left.
So were these students who were actually intending on going into journalism, or?
No, not necessarily. I think a lot of them were just interested in learning how to make films and how to make documentaries. Some of them did go into journalism, but no, I think for the most part they just were eager to learn how to make a documentary. So it was, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it was nice just to meet young people and to talk to young people, and nice to show my, you know, a number of my documentaries that I'd made, and we could discuss it, and they could critique it, and as some of them did, you know, they weren't exactly a shy crowd, you know.
Yeah. What's your favorite style of documentary? Because there are different ways of doing documentaries.
Well, you know, a lot of the documentaries that I made had no narration. Some of them did, and
I see a lot on HBO.
Yes,
that
yeah,
have no,
yeah.
As a matter of fact, that's an HBO thing. They don't like narration.
Yeah, and it's you know, and in that kind of program, in that kind of documentary, you let the person who you've decided is an interesting soul or persons, to let them tell the story. It's not a real, you know, it's not. You don't have to think that much to come to the conclusion that would really work. But it's difficult to do with no narration. You've got to go from A to B to C, and you've got to get these people to bring you there. But that's that was my favorite way of doing a documentary. And I also like to like Cameron and I work with, like Ty Evans and Keith Whalen, people you would know well. I like to let them do their thing. I like the big picture, you know. So I would say to Ty, this is what I hope to get, and then let Ty go off and do his thing. And I think that always worked. I believe strongly in the visual component of a documentary. Obviously, you know, it's just as important as the information. That's the way I looked at it.
And of course, cameramen are journalists too.
They are, and it's a, you know, we were talking earlier about the new journalism. I don't think cameramen get a chance to really be all that creative these days. Again, because of the nature of the beast, it's usually a reporter talking into the lens.
Or Skype.
Yes, or Skype.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, let's not go there for sure, yeah.
Bob, it's been fabulous.
Oh, thanks, Carl.
We've done 2 parts of this show with you, and it's like, you know, we could do more. But anyway.
I really enjoyed it, Carl.
We'll hopefully meet again.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And that's Point to Point with Bob Wakeham.
Focused on quality and convenience, there isn't much you won't find at Marie's Mini Mart. Home-style breads, sandwiches, plus a variety of artisan breads and delicious single-serve desserts available exclusively at our Frecker Drive location. Marie's Mini Mart, with 25 locations wherever you go, there we are.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
You're watching Rogers TV, St. John's.
With NHL Center Ice, you get a premium ticket to the games you want every night of the season. With up to 37 out-of-market games a week to choose from, you'll get more goals, more saves, more non-stop action from the teams you love. NHL Center Ice, part of the Rogers Super Sports Pack. All this for only $35.95 a month. Order through your remote on Channel 431 or call 1-888-ROGERS-1 today.
Most people living with it don't even know they have it.
I'm Alex.